welcome to another episode of Lucas Lawn Care and Equipment. Today, it's another rainy day, and it's a big wet mess out in the yard, so we won't be able to get down on hands and knees today. But, what I do want to talk to you, because the weather is starting to get a little bit cooler and our fescues are starting to grow, which means it's going to be that much more important in order to have a good, sharp blade, in addition to other maintenance items on your equipment. But for today, we're going to talk about lawnmower blades, just one or two different types that are out there, as well as some of the things that you can do to keep those blades sharp, and maybe even a best practice, as well as a tool or so that you're going to need yourself in order to get that blade as sharp as you would like. So, here we go. Well, first things first, let's take a look at the different blade types that are out there. Now, for comparison purposes, this is obviously not a lawnmower blade, this is clearly a machete, but the point I wanted to make with this machete is that the blade in which it is cut, or how it is cut, is done from both sides, or sharpened from both sides. So, if you look closely, you have a sharp edge on this side and a sharp edge on this side. It meets, and the final blade edge is right up the center. Now, this is not what you want with a lawnmower blade. So a lawnmower blade always has one blade edge on that side, and then on the opposing side it's just flat. Now, the point of this is to create a shearing and lift effect when you're using your lawnmower. And so you've got your blade edge, and the opposing side here is called the sail. And this comes in different varieties, but the idea behind this is that when the blade is sheared, the cut off portion is lifted up and whirls about the deck in certain ways for either mulching purposes, bagging purposes, or even a push type way where it allows to be discharged from the side of the unit that you're using. So, like I said, there was a mulching type, a side discharge type, and you also have your standard cut, and it comes in different ways, but I wanted to show you this blade type, which, as I was just showing you, is a mulching blade. It is nothing special, just a factory blade that came on one of the units. I believe I've got a neighbor that provided me this one, but I wanted to use this for demonstration purposes just because there was a thing or two done about the sharpening on this blade that I'd like to show you not to do. And this blade, which also came off of a different unit, and what you'll notice different about this is the sail edge on the back is curved in such a way that it is a combination of a mulching and side discharge. And so it's pushed up as well as out, and for that reason it's a dual purpose type of blade. But one of the things that you'll definitely know about this, because this blade was not well maintained and it was left outside for long periods of time without sharpening. So as you can see, rust built up, and it looks like there's some pitting there that was probably caused from rocks or other debris that was laid about the yard. And then there's my personal favorite. It's a little bit more advanced as far as being able to mulch and kind of dice or mince up the cut blades, is the gator blade. And so I use this on my Husqvarna equipment, and I have made a modification because there is a lot of controversy about how to sharpen a blade, or in which way to sharpen a blade, or whether or not certain modifications are actually better. But one of the things to note is that blades are manufactured very specifically in order to create a certain type of cut, a certain type of push, and a certain type of whirling effect that is caused from that sail design that is on the back of the blade. And so this particular blade, though it's primarily used for mulching, you could use it for bagging or discharging out the side of the unit, but in this case the sail, as you can see, has been cut up into three sections and tilted to create a mincing like effect. And so, like I said before, there are some modifications that I have made, and there's a good practice that I can say with that, or has been done with the blade here, so it is sharpened pretty much to the point where you shear a piece of paper as you were holding it. That is one of the tests that I'll do, and I could possibly show you that at a later time. But for demonstration purposes, I wanted to show you the bottom of a lawnmower here, because oftentimes people just sort of throw their lawnmower out to the side of the house after it starts up or they're finished cutting. But this is a prime example of a lawnmower that's been left outside for long periods of time, where there is excessive rust that builds up to the point where even the edge starts to deteriorate just from the sheer fact that moisture and other debris has hit this edge and it has not been maintained. So the very first step in reviving a blade like this, if you want to try and repurpose it and it's not bent, warped, or overly chipped, and it is possible to save it, is you're going to want to pick up yourself a tool set that is nothing fancy. It doesn't have to be terribly elaborate or expensive. A standard metric and SAE standard set with sockets, some combination wrenches, and the two more popular sizes for most of our mowers are either a 14, a 9/16, and in some cases, maybe even for your smaller commercial stuff, you'll see the bottom bolt here will be of a 5/8. And so in order to get this off, it's just like your parents may have said, lefty loosey, righty tighty, and you're going to want to put the ratchet onto the bolt. And if you don't have thick boots where you can hold the blade, then I always recommend that if you're just using like outdoor tennis shoes, that you can take a block of wood and you can place it here, because when you go ahead and turn this left, you're always having the blade edge go up against your foot, and you want to protect your foot, because if it is for some reason sharp, you really don't want it going into your foot. So taking this, again, safety first, some gloves, having your safety glasses is a great idea. You go ahead and put the wood there, and you'll lift the lawnmower up onto its side, place your foot right next to it, and then you'll put the socket and the ratchet on there, and then turn left until that bolt comes all the way out and the blade is removed. So once you have the blade removed, then you're going to want to go ahead and put it down onto your work table. And now your work table, again, doesn't have to be anything fancy. I'm actually operating for today off of a pallet that is on nothing more than sawhorses, but I've got this extra work table here where I've taken a C-clamp, or one of my favorite tools, also commonly seen in woodworking tools, the Irwin Quick Grips. You could find this at any big box store. But we'll go ahead and put that on there, tighten it up, and so we have the blade, we have the edge where it's fully extended off the end of your work table, and there's really, I would say, commonly two popular ways, without getting into the big machines, for sharpening your blades. My recommendation is using a file. It does require a bit more manual effort, but for those of you who want to use a power tool, there are two power tools. Actually, they're the same power tool, but you could go to Harbor Freight and pick one up. I think with a coupon or so, it's only like $10. I see them in the coupons all the time, but there are two different types of discs that go on here. I mean, there are more than that, but for the sake of sharpening a lawnmower blade, we're going to want either a 80 grit sanding flapper disc, or they also have a few other, but I normally will use a 120 grit. It's quite a bit finer, but the point is when you're using this particular tool, it potentially can take off an awful lot of material quite quickly, and you really want to maintain that manufacturer's edge. Now, there's a lot of different or opinions or discrepancies about the types of edge that work best. Just know that the manufacturer's original edge, the degree of that edge, is what you want to maintain. So some say 30, some say 45. I've even seen as high as 60, but the point is you really want to take off as little material as possible in order to just get the blade nice and sharp. And so one of the things I definitely do not recommend is using one of these angle grinding discs that it's meant to take off a whole lot more material. A lot of people will use these to do grinding very quickly, but the point is like I was saying before, it takes off too much material too fast. So I do recommend, if you had to go and choose, or you don't end up with some kind of combination pack from Harbor Freight or any of the other box stores, I just so happen to have a Harbor Freight relatively close to me, is the 120 sanding flap discs. And like I said, these angle grinders are like $10, and you know, they're good entry-level angle grinders. They don't take a tremendous amount of stress, but that's okay because we're just doing lawnmower blades, and they're great to have. One extra thing for those of you who want to go maybe a little bit overboard, because I have seen this in the past, is once you get the lawnmower blade off, as far as cleaning, usually there's either chunks of rust or there's big clumps of grass or dirt on here that adhere after they dry. One of the common ways to remove that is taking like a sharpened putty knife or some type of scraper and scraping that off. Being that I'm working on lawnmowers a little bit more frequently, I actually pick up another attachment that I have on a separate grinder. It's just a wire wheel, where before I begin sharpening the blade, because you don't want the wire wheel hitting a nice sharp edge, it's just going to go ahead and dull that over, is I'll go ahead and I'll mount this on the work table, and I'll basically skim over this to take the dirt and debris layer off of that, and then I'll go ahead and mount it in the vise or on my clamps and begin sharpening. So that's one way you can do it with the power tool, but truly, if you're to ask me my recommendation for what I do on my personal blades, I not only go so far as using a coarse and fine file here. I've got several of these, but this is the one I would say I'm using most frequently now. But I also have a stone that I use for sharpening. So one of the different places that you can go to learn more about just sharpening blades, I mean, is simply knife sharpening. If you view other YouTube videos, I mean, like I said, just because they sharpen on both sides doesn't mean you have to do that on the lawnmower blade. So I pick up a stone, so it really puts that sharp edge on there, and it is night and day difference as far as listening to and watching the lawnmower perform out in my yard. So with that, what we're going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and alter the camera view so you can take a look at this lawnmower blade that I've got here and kind of how it is that I sharpen the edge of that blade. Alright, so first things first, safety. Make sure you put your safety glasses on because you never know. But anyway, when you get into the edge here, now that we've got it mounted to the edge of the work table here, normally we'd start with the coarse side and we would work it like this until all of those dents and all of the rust pockets and such have been smoothed out and the edge starts to become nice and straight. Now, like I may have said before, we don't really want to sharpen the opposing side. Now, you can take some debris off by taking the fine edge of the file and coming across the bottom until it is nice and smooth on both sides, but the point is you really don't want to sharpen the bottom edge. So if you get a little bit confused about what's top versus the bottom, just know that the sail edge always goes up and towards the underside of the deck. So that's a clue that this is going to be the top side if you get confused on which side to sharpen. So what we'll do, other than this, is I'll also bring over the power tool just so you can see how the edge is maintained with that. Alright, so now we're going to use the power tool, but the only difference besides safety glasses, because it puts out a lot of noise, is hearing protection. And one of the things that you need to remember when you're using the power tool, the angle grinder here, is that flap disc, you want to make nice sweeping motions across the blade, and for the way that this normally spins, it's clockwise. So you want the top of the clockwise disc spinning to the back of the blade. So you want to push the blade edge metal back, and then remember, long, nice sweeping motions, and that way you don't accidentally take out too much in each little area or create a low spot. So it's going to look like this. now that you see, when you look real close, you've got nice, even, sharpened edge, and you see that there's no pits, and you've maintained just enough of that angle when you're going ahead and taking off just small amounts of material, just a little layer at a time. Like I said before, we don't want to take off too much, and this is going to be very important when we go to balance the blade. So as that blade is spinning, it's nice and even on both sides, and we don't end up with excessive shaking in the lawnmower. This is that blade that I showed earlier that was all dented up, and there's even some chunks missing out of this. So there's one of the things that you could do to balance the blade. Now there are different types of devices that you can purchase on Amazon, and it does get pretty expensive, especially if you go with the magnetic ones that you can find online with eBay and so forth. But really, all you need to do is take a finishing nail or some type of nail, whether it's in the edge of your workbench, where that nail is nice and level and can support the weight of a blade, because really you're just trying to make sure that the weight on both sides are nice and even. So if we go ahead, if you notice, there's always some type of cutout in the center, and so there's a top edge on the inner side of that hole that you want to make sure that the nail or whatever balancing piece of equipment that you're using is centered. So if you're using one of those conical type of tabletop balancers, you may even have to clean this hole out just a little bit so it sits nice and flush on top of the tool. But if you happen to use a nail like I do on the side of this piece of wood here, then you could just simply set it right into the center, and then if it's heavy on one end, it'll fall to that side, and then you'll need to know, that will tell you or indicate to you that you'll need to take additional material off that side. So as you can see, this side is just a little bit heavier, and so we'll need to remove some material off of this. But honestly, you know, the chipping and the rust is so excessive, I'd probably just want to go ahead and replace the blade. Now, this is the blade that we just sharpened a moment ago using not only the file but the power tool as well. And now the flower type of hold pattern that's here, it's not going to be able to be mounted both ways. You'll have to find the one that's in the center of the blade, and that way you'll hang the nail, or you'll hang the blade on the nail right in the center. So let's go ahead and put that on there. Alright, it's nice and even. So we go ahead and I tip it a little bit just to see if maybe just the resistance of the blade being on the nail has any effect. It doesn't really, and so I'm going to say that that's good. So I'll be able to go ahead and put that back on my piece of equipment, and again, just to reiterate, the blade's nice and clean, no debris, so the cut pieces of grass will be able to transition smoothly from the blade edge over the sail and be used in whichever way is going to be best. So, outside of that, you've got yourself a good blade, and you're just going to go ahead and put the bolt back through the center. Make sure that the sail, again, is up towards the deck, as well as the blade edge, and the flat portion of your blade is down towards the ground. And then you'll go ahead and put the bolt back in, and then tighten it down. Same thing, either using your boot's edge or the piece of wood that I was showing you before to prevent the blade from going into the side of your shoe. Remember, be safe. Make sure you're wearing hearing protection if you are using a power tool. We don't want any accidents. And other than that, enjoy the mow, and we will see you in the yard. Subscribe, and thanks for watching.